In a family of 18 children, there is one who has walked the quietest and, I'd argue, the bravest road of all. Meri Brown had just one child. And that child's journey, the journey of growing up inside a deeply traditional, religious, plural family, and then stepping fully into their own identity, is one of the most moving stories this whole franchise has ever touched, even though the show often kept it at the margins. I'm talking about Leon. Tonight, I want to give that story the spotlight and the respect it deserves. Because in a family defined by rigid structure and public spectacle, Leon's path of self-discovery and authenticity might be the most genuinely inspiring thread of them all. So let's talk about Meri's only child, with the care this story has always deserved. Let me start with what it means to be Meri's only child, because that fact shapes everything. While the other wives had houses full of kids, Meri had one. In a sprawling family of 18 children, Leon grew up as the singular child of a mother who was, herself, often on the margins of the family. That's a unique position. It meant a particular closeness between mother and child, a bond that didn't have to be shared among siblings the way it did in the other households. And it meant that Leon's journey and Meri's journey have always been intertwined in a way that's different from the other parent-child relationships in this family. To understand Leon, you have to understand that singular, close bond with a mother who knew something about feeling like an outsider herself. Now let me talk about the journey itself, carefully and respectfully, because this is a real person's life, not a plot point. Leon grew up in a family rooted in a conservative religious worldview, the kind of environment where questions of identity and orientation are not always met with openness. And within that environment, Leon came to understand and share their own truth. First coming out publicly years ago, and later sharing their identity as a transgender person, living openly and authentically as themselves. I want to be clear about the framing here. This is not a scandal. This is not a drama. This is a human being doing one of the hardest and most courageous things a person can do, becoming fully themselves, in public, in front of an audience, against the backdrop of a family and a faith that didn't make it easy. And I really want you to sit with how much courage that takes, especially in this specific context. Coming into your own identity is hard for anyone. Doing it while growing up in a strict religious community, where that identity may conflict with the teachings you were raised on, is still harder. And doing all of that publicly, on a television show watched by millions, with the whole country forming opinions, is a level of difficulty most of us will never have to face. Leon navigated all three of those at once, the private struggle, the religious tension, and the public exposure, all simultaneously. That's not just brave, that's extraordinary. Whatever else you take from this video, take that. Leon walked one of the hardest possible roads with a quiet dignity that deserves genuine admiration. Let me talk about Meri's role in this, because it's one of the most quietly beautiful parts of the story. By all public accounts, Meri has been supportive of her child. And think about what that means in context. Meri was raised in and built her adult life around a conservative religious framework. For a parent from that background to choose love and acceptance of a child whose identity might challenge that framework, that's its own act of growth and grace. It would have been easy, given her upbringing, for Meri to respond with rejection. Instead, she chose her child. She chose love. And in doing so, she modeled something powerful, that a parent's love can be bigger than the framework they were raised in. That choice, for a woman like Meri, was its own quiet revolution. There's something poetic, too, in the bond between these two specific people. Meri spent years as the wife who often felt on the outside, the one who didn't quite fit the center of the family, the one who knew what it was to feel unseen. And her only child also walked a path of being different, of not fitting the mold the family expected. So you have a mother and child who, in different ways, both knew what it was to be the one who didn't fit. And rather than letting that pull them apart, it seems to have bound them together. Meri understood, perhaps better than anyone in that family could, what it feels like to be on the margins. And that understanding may be exactly what allowed her to embrace her child so fully. Two outsiders, finding home in each other. Let me address why I think the show often kept this story at the margins, because it's worth examining. A program built on a conservative, religious, plural marriage premise doesn't always know what to do with a story like Leon's. It complicates the picture. It doesn't fit neatly into the show's central narrative. And so, whether consciously or not, a story this significant, a child of the family coming into a transgender identity, often got less of the spotlight than its importance warranted. Which is a shame, because in many ways, it's one of the most genuinely meaningful things to ever happen within this family. The show that broadcast every argument and every tearful confessional sometimes seemed least equipped to handle its most profound and most human story. That tells you something about the limits of the show's lens. Now, I want to be thoughtful about boundaries here, because Leon is a private adult and deserves to have their story told on their own terms, not mined for content. So I'm not going to speculate about private details, relationships, or anything Leon hasn't chosen to share publicly. What I'm doing tonight is honoring the broad, public arc of a courageous journey and the supportive mother-child bond at its center, not prying into a life that belongs to Leon. There's a way to celebrate someone's story respectfully, focusing on the courage and the love rather than turning a real person into a spectacle. That's the line I want to walk. Leon's full story is Leon's to tell. What I can do is point to the bravery of it and say it deserves admiration. Let me put Leon's journey in the context of the broader family theme we keep returning to, the next generation charting its own path. We've talked about how the Brown kids, across the board, have built lives that look nothing like the one their parents modeled. Leon's journey is, in a sense, the most profound version of that. Where other kids declined to continue the lifestyle or distanced themselves from the family, Leon did something even more fundamental, fully claiming an authentic identity that the family's original framework didn't have room for. It's the ultimate expression of the next generation's refusal to be confined by the mold they were born into. And it's a powerful reminder that the deepest kind of independence isn't just about lifestyle choices. It's about the freedom to be who you actually are. I think there's a universal resonance to Leon's story that goes far beyond this one family, and it's why it matters to so many people. So many of us grow up in families, communities, or belief systems that have a fixed idea of who we're supposed to be. And the journey toward becoming our authentic selves, especially when it means diverging from what we were raised to be, is one of the most universal and most difficult human experiences there is. Leon lived that journey out loud, publicly, courageously. And for anyone watching who has ever felt they couldn't be fully themselves in the world they came from, Leon's story is a beacon. It says it's possible to honor where you came from and still become who you truly are. That's not a sister wives story. That's a human story, and a deeply important one. And let me say something about what Meri and Leon together represent, because I think it's genuinely hopeful. In a family that has given us so many stories of fracture, betrayal, money disputes, and broken trust, the Meri and Leon bond stands out as a story of love holding firm under pressure. A mother and child who each knew what it was to be different, choosing each other, choosing acceptance, choosing love over the rigid expectations they were both handed. In all the wreckage of this family, that relationship is a bright spot. It's proof that even within a structure that broke so much, something genuinely beautiful and genuinely loving managed to grow and survive. And honestly, in a family with this much heartbreak, that matters. We need the bright spots. Meri and Leon are one of the brightest. So when I step back and look at Leon's story, here's what I see. I see the bravest, quietest journey in a family of 18 children. I see a person who navigated private struggle, religious tension, and public exposure all at once, and came through it living authentically as themselves. I see a mother who chose love over the framework she was raised in, and a mother-child bond forged between two people who both knew what it was to be an outsider. And I see a story the show too often kept at the margins, but which may be the most genuinely inspiring and most human thing this entire franchise ever touched. Leon's path is a reminder that the deepest courage isn't loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet, steady insistence on being exactly who you are. Let me talk about why representation like this matters so much, because I think it's bigger than one family. When someone from a conservative religious background publicly lives an authentic LGBTQ identity, it does something powerful for everyone watching who comes from a similar world. For a young person growing up in a strict community, feeling like they have to hide who they are, seeing someone like Leon, someone who came from that same kind of environment and still found a way to live openly, can be genuinely life-changing. It says, you are not alone, and it is possible. Representation isn't an abstract concept. It's a real teenager somewhere, watching, realizing that their future doesn't have to be a closet. Leon, simply by living openly, became that kind of beacon for people we'll never meet, whether Leon set out to or not. That's a quiet form of heroism. And I think it's worth sitting with how rare and valuable that particular kind of visibility is. There's plenty of LGBTQ representation in media that comes from secular, accepting backgrounds. There's far less that comes from the conservative, deeply religious world the Browns inhabit. So Leon's story fills a gap that matters. It speaks specifically to the people who are told, explicitly or implicitly, that their faith and their identity can't coexist, that they have to choose. Leon's journey complicates that false choice. It shows a person navigating both their roots and their truth, not by rejecting where they came from, but by insisting that they get to be whole. For viewers caught in that exact bind, that's not just representation, it's a roadmap. Now, I want to return to Meri, because I think her evolution as a parent is one of the most underrated arcs in this whole franchise, and it deserves real credit. Acceptance, for a parent from her background, is not automatic. It's a journey of its own. Parents raised in strict frameworks often have to grow, to stretch, to re-examine things they once held as fixed in order to fully embrace a child whose life challenges those frameworks. And from everything we can see publicly, Meri did that growing. She chose her child over the rigidity of the worldview she inherited. That's not a small thing. It represents a mother actively choosing love, again and again, even when it meant evolving past parts of her own upbringing. In a culture that too often tells these stories as tragedies of rejection, Meri and Leon offer the other version, the one where the parent grows and the love holds. We need more of that version told. There's a broader lesson in Meri's choice that applies to every parent, regardless of background. The deepest job of a parent isn't to mold a child into a predetermined shape. It's to love and support the actual human being the child turns out to be. That sounds obvious, but it's one of the hardest things in the world when the child's reality diverges from the parent's expectations. Meri faced that divergence in one of its most challenging forms, and she chose her child. Every parent watching who is wrestling with a child who isn't who they imagined, for any reason, can learn something from that. Love that's conditional on the child matching your expectations isn't really unconditional love. Meri showed what the unconditional version looks like, and she showed it under real pressure. I want to be careful here, but I also think it's fair to gently note the contrast this draws within the family, without speculating about any private relationship. We've spent a lot of time on this channel discussing the distance between Cody and many of his children. Against that backdrop, the strength of the Meri and Leon bond stands out even more. Here is a parent-child relationship in this family that, by all public appearances, grew stronger through challenge, rather than weaker. Whatever the dynamics elsewhere in the family, this particular bond seems to have been built on a foundation of acceptance that held. I'll leave the comparisons there, because I don't want to speculate about relationships I can't see. But the simple fact that Meri and Leon's bond appears so strong is worth celebrating in a family where so many bonds frayed. Let me say something about the particular weight of being a first in your family, because I think Leon carries that. In many families, there's a first. The first to come out, the first to leave the faith, the first to live differently, the first to break a mold that everyone else simply accepted. And being the first is uniquely hard, because there's no one ahead of you who's already done it. No map, no example, no one who can say, I went through this too and it was okay. The first has to be brave without the comfort of precedent. Leon, in this family and this community, was a kind of first. And firsts pay a price that the people who come after them don't have to pay, because the first is the one who makes it thinkable for everyone else. There's a real nobility in that role, even when it's lonely. And here's a hopeful thought that flows from that. Because Leon walked this road, the road is now a little more walkable for anyone in that extended family or community who comes after. The first one through the door holds it open for the others. Maybe there's a younger cousin, a future relative, someone in that broader world who will one day have an easier time being themselves because Leon showed it could be done with dignity and survived. That's the gift the brave first gives to everyone who follows. They turn an impossible-seeming path into a proven one. Leon may never know all the people their courage quietly helped, but that ripple is real, and it's one of the most meaningful things a person can leave behind. The last thing I want to say is about what this whole story tells us about love and family, because I think it's the heart of it. This franchise has been, in so many ways, a long study of a family falling apart. Marriages dissolved, trust broke, money divides people, bonds frayed. And against all of that, the Meri and Leon story stands as evidence that love, real love, the kind that grows and stretches and chooses the actual person in front of it, can survive even in the hardest soil. It's a reminder that family isn't really about matching a structure or fulfilling an expectation. It's about whether you show up for each other as you actually are. Meri showed up for Leon. Leon had the courage to be fully themselves. And out of a family that broke in so many places, that one bond held and even grew stronger. In the end, that might be the most important thing this entire show ever accidentally taught us about what family is actually for. So, I'll turn it over to you now, and I'd love for the comments on this one to be as warm and respectful as the story deserves. What do you think it says about Meri that she chose love and acceptance, despite the conservative framework she was raised in? And here's the bigger question for the comments. Do you think the show should have given Leon's journey more of the spotlight and the respect it deserved, instead of keeping it at the margins? Tell me where you land, because I read every comment, and conversations about courage and acceptance are some of the most meaningful this audience has. If you'd like me to do a fuller, respectful look at the bonds between the wives and their children, the relationships that actually held strong through everything, let me know, and I'll build it. And if you appreciate that we cover the family's most personal stories with genuine care and respect, instead of turning them into clickbait, then do me a favor and subscribe, because kindness and honesty absolutely belong together. And that's exactly what we aim for here.